Good morning, good afternoon. I'm here with Malcolm today from Backbase, and we're going to be talking today about the Australian market and how Backbase is entering the Australian market and strengthening themselves there, and about the open banking regulations that I understand in Australia have opened up in the last few weeks and the opportunities that's bringing with itself. But perhaps, Malcolm, you can tell us first a little bit about how it came about that you joined Backbase, and maybe a little bit about what's so brilliant about Backbase that brought you into that company.
Yeah, so I've been a startup guy for quite a while, and was just finishing up in another fintech, and a former colleague of mine worked for Backbase. And the thing that appealed to me about Backbase, having come from off a couple of very early stage startups, was here was a very dynamic startup, but with a really strong proven technology and a great momentum. And so it was kind of, I had a bit of a bumpy ride for a little while, and so it was refreshing to join a company that really had proven some solid technology, and then was on this great trajectory. That was a little over a year ago.
Okay, and Backbase started in Holland.
Yeah, Backbase was founded in the Netherlands. Yeah, about 12 years ago now.
Okay.
And started out as sort of a portal company, and then at a point in its life cycle, saw a really big opportunity in financial services, and so really doubled down, focused on banking, and has gone from kind of being a horizontal portal technology company to a company with some really deep technology in the banking space.
Is it more to do with the fact that they're from Holland, that they've got this digital aspiration? Because we see a lot of startups coming out of Holland with some very unique prospects and unique ideas.
Yeah, there does seem to be quite a group of them, doesn't there? Very high caliber in financial services. Yeah, I'm not sure of the background there, whether there's something about Amsterdam that 10 years ago was incubating these kind of world-class entrepreneurial ideas.
Well, I think one of the things, because obviously we're looking at the Tesla share price as well the last few days and how amazing that's been going. Backbase, when they came into the Australian market, what was the biggest reason that they looked at the market, and what was the most attractive part of it? Because obviously Teslas weren't there, so maybe there was something else.
Yeah, well, I think Backbase for some years now has been doing business globally. From that hub in Amsterdam, flying all over the place. We've got customers on every continent, and Australia is a mature financial services market. Australian banks are pretty innovative. The Australian population, is pretty accepting of digital technology. Wherever you look, the adoption of digital is pretty high. And certainly that's the case in banking. And we have some world-class banks, and Backbase with some world-class digital banking technology that was kind of a natural fit. So for a couple of years, Backbase was servicing clients and pursuing business here from the hub in Amsterdam. As you can imagine, that is challenging in more ways than one. And so, 2018, decided it was time to actually, plant a flag and start investing a bit more in this market. And so I joined at that point, but it was just me for a little while. And it's taken a little bit of time to build up a bit more momentum. And, now it's reached the point we've got a few people on the ground, and we're, have some pretty aggressive growth plans for the year to come. And
the open banking platform now that's been opened by the government, obviously slight delay on Europe and other places, but still you're well ahead of some countries we've spoken to. But on the open banking side, Australia hasn't started 2 years ago like Europe. It's just now. How much of an impact has that made on your business and the decision of Backbase to come to Australia? Was that something that you were thinking about before opening into Australia?
No, it wasn't. Open banking is certainly something that does create opportunities for us. There are a number of ways in which we help banks who are trying to respond to both the compliance obligations as well as the upside opportunity with open banking. But no, there was plenty of motivation for Backbase to invest here before that. But certainly now that open banking is very much on the agenda, we've got 4 major banks here, who have 7 to 10 million customers if we're talking about the consumer segment. So that kind of scale. And then there's,
So when it comes to the API technology within these banks and using the data better, how does Backbase work with the banks to help them use the data and the customer information better?
Yeah, so There's a number of challenges that the banks have today in using that data. And, when I talk to executives, you hear numbers like one executive recently said, he thinks they're getting about 10% of the value out of the data they hold currently. That's their own data, let alone the other data that's now accessible in the market. And so, one part of the challenge is just storing and managing that data in a way that makes it accessible to use. Another part is connecting from there through to all of the digital touch points through which your staff as well as your customers interact, so that you can personalize, so that you can provide tailored advice leveraging that data. So where Backbase helps is with that second step. So we provide a digital experience platform that sits above all of the core systems that the bank has, and we orchestrate all of the interactions that customers and employees have through those digital channels. And so what we're helping banks do, once they get their data into shape, then we provide them an open platform with a whole lot of flexible tools that enable them to then use that, in servicing the customers and leverage the benefit of having that data with the customers.
Fantastic. So when it comes to these APIs and these platforms, obviously the data needs to be what we call managed appropriately. So you have to help the customer experience. You have to look at artificial intelligence, working with the cloud. Is Backbase involved in all of these sectors as well?
Yeah, so, working with the cloud, yes. Backbase is a very modern platform, so it's cloud native. All of our deployments these days tend to be in the cloud. So for banks that are looking to also improve in that way, Backbase is a good fit. In terms of the APIs, the way Backbase is built, again, the modern kind of architecture means it's very easy either to for the banks to use other systems working with Backbase, because everything that's in Backbase is accessible, to integrate with other tools that you have. So if you are investing in some, proprietary machine learning tools, then anything that's going on in the channels is easily available for ingest by those tools to incorporate with any other data that you're looking at to understand behaviorally what's going on with the customer. In turn, because Backbase is open, if you have some tools like that are surfacing insights, the open nature of Backbase and our APIs mean that it's very easy to push, the output of those insights that your artificial intelligence tools are generating, to push those towards the customer. So if, for example, you've identified an opportunity to nudge a customer in a direction that will, improve their financial health, then that's straightforward to do because of the way Backbase is built. And that's certainly one of the big challenges. I know there's a very sophisticated data team in one of our big four banks who are endlessly frustrated with how hard it is for them to surface the insights that they're generating up through the channels, because it's just a legacy kind of siloed architecture that exists. And, it's taking some time for that bank to clean that up so that that data team, can really deliver the impact that, that's there in potential form off the data they have.
So that must be also changing dynamics in the market. We've watched Revolut grow into Australia. You have companies like 86400 and Hay as well, with new challenger banks. With these challenges of the legacy banks, as you so rightly pointed out, as they are you finding the challenger banks are having an easier time maybe breaking into Australia than they potentially should be?
They're certainly getting a reasonably warm reception. Up, just to pick one, has been doing pretty well. Their customer numbers have been growing, pretty steadily. I think 86 have been publishing numbers recently. They're growing nicely. They announced their sort of growth targets for the next year or two, and there's certainly some ambitious targets. Funding, of course, is still a challenge for them. Most of them, with the exception of 86, are not yet lending. Right, so they're accepting deposits and having to fund the interest on those deposits, for the time being, because they can't generate a return on that through lending. So I think for most of them, a big priority at the moment is to launch their lending products so they can solve that and not kind of have to keep, funding those interest payments to their customers. But certainly the interest from consumers has been strong. I think what's a little hard to gauge is how many consumers are adopting them just as a convenient payment account versus really taking them seriously as their primary financial partner. And that's obviously in the long term what's necessary for these neos to build a sustainable business. So I think we'll see as they get more of their lending products out into the market, and we start to see what the take up of that is. We'll get better insight into just how successful they're likely to be, and whether they're going to have a meaningful impact on the market.
Okay, I mean, in Europe here, we're seeing huge moves by banks like Santander to grow their businesses in the startup sector and become more customer friendly. Less so in some of the other banks like perhaps UniCredit and other banks. So I assume that you have a similar situation in Australia as well, that some of your legacy banks are a little bit frightened of Revolut coming in and actually doing something about it, and other ones are just sitting there and thinking, maybe it'll be okay,
Yeah, in general, I'd say that there is quite a bit of activity by the banks focused on serving customers better. But I think the primary motivator has been the regulatory kick. You're probably familiar with the inquiry that we had a little over a year ago, into the behaviour of the financial sector, and so there's been a lot of remediation coming off of that. But there was also that impacted the customer sentiment as well, and so I think there's been a lot of work done since then, really focusing on how to serve customers better. I think in terms of that inertia that you asked about, kind of sitting back, I see that a little bit more in kind of the mid-tier, and I think it's partly because a number of them are sitting on legacy technology platforms, and when you're at that scale, renovating those platforms is a pretty big undertaking. To contrast that against, you've got CBA kind of investing over $1 billion a year, right, in their technology programs. Well, if you're a mutual, with say 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 members, you don't have anywhere near that kind of budget to play with, and so a technology transformation is a pretty risky undertaking. So I think for a number of them, from the conversations we have, they're aware of this creeping threat. The challenge is how when does that get to a point where it's so compelling that it forces them to act on this, despite the challenges they face from a budgetary point of view and even from a talent point of view. Right, it's such a competitive market now for technologists with financial expertise, that if you're in that kind of mid-market space, it can be pretty tough to get the caliber of talent you need to undertake a major transformation like this. But I think we'll see more and more of them concluding that they can't afford to wait anymore. They really need to get moving.
So Backbase would say, for instance, work with a mutual fund like that, and you obviously work with other banks or financial institutions in Australia. Can you give us an example of a use case of how you've helped a bank and what you've actually done, and how your tech team has gone in and helped a bank improve their data and their customer-centric approach?
Yeah, sure. So we're working in this market. We've got clients that span the scale all the way from some of the from tier ones right the way down. At the top end, Backbase tends to be adopted as a platform on which the bank builds because of the resources they have. So, when a large bank like that is wanting to renovate, they have access to a very large number of clever people, but getting a lot of clever people together to build from scratch is still risky and takes time. And so they tend to adopt Backbase as a open, flexible platform, but one with a sensible architecture. So it just lets them get started quicker, but because it's open and it is a platform, it doesn't constrain them. So, they can use their large resources in terms of talent and creativity to build on top of that. When we move down into the middle market where, there's this this challenge for talent and challenge around budget, the reason those sort of banks tend to adopt Backbase is because it's not only a platform, but we also provide sort of most of the standard capabilities you need to deliver a digital banking experience. So if we talk about consumer, you can launch an MVP that has almost everything that a customer is looking for in a retail experience very rapidly. But unlike adopting, a white label product, because it still is a platform that we've built these template experiences on top of, they can quickly launch that and then tailor the parts of it that they want to differentiate their experience. Right? So it's really taking a lot of risk out of that. So rather than spending 18 months building a new platform and building new banking experiences from scratch, they can very quickly launch something, get it in the hands of customers, get some feedback, but they're not locked in. So if their feedback indicates that actually this is an area where there's an opportunity to do something different for customers, they've got the flexibility to do that. And then if we come down to the smaller credit unions and so on, and also the neos, actually, we're speaking to a number of neos. Well, let's talk specifically about the neos. For them, the things are changing so quickly now that an idea that you have today, if you take 18 months to hire a few developers and kind of scrape together and gradually build that out, by the time you get it into the hands of customers, the market's moved on, and what was a great idea when you hatched it, it's not anymore. And so the common theme in our discussions with neos these days is, how do we get to market, as soon as possible, so that we can then get to work on the, whatever the unique piece is that, their hypothesis is that they'll win customers based on.
So it sounds really innovative what you're saying. Obviously, bringing it time to market is a really important thing, but you must have a really strong tech team and tech product behind this. Perhaps you could go into a little bit more detail about the actual technologies your product is built on, what kind of people are working in the team.
Yeah, we do. So, Backbase, of the sort of 1,000 odd staff that we have, about roughly half of those are in R&D, spread across a number of different hubs, the largest obviously being in the Netherlands. And that's, it's been that way for some time. So there's really a huge amount of investment into that platform, and not only delivering new capability, but also keeping the technologies within the platform up to date. One thing Backbase does focus on from a technology point of view is using open standard technologies. So it's the languages that developers are used to, the frameworks, the open source frameworks that are sort of the obvious choice, and we do that so that when customers adopt the Backbase platform, when they want to take control and start to innovate on that platform themselves, it's not hard for, they're not looking for someone with some kind of proprietary, technical knowledge. There's not some esoteric framework that they have to know, from on the back end. You just need to find good enterprise Java developers. From an infrastructure point of view, you just need, capable DevOps people who understand whether it's AWS or Azure or GCP. And so that's a very intentional thing with Backbase, is just to use standard open technologies to make it as easy as possible for our clients. Because our sort of preferred approach is to help customers deliver an MVP using our platform, and we'll inject typically resources to help accelerate them to that point. And then as we're on that journey, we also have the bank's people involved, so that they get up to speed with that, and then they can take control of that. Because except for perhaps the smallest banks these days, that ability to have more control of their digital destiny is a high priority. And so we're trying to enable that, and a key to that is just using open common technologies.
So we've had problems over in Europe regarding the regulator when it comes to ownership of data. And when we're talking about the big cloud platforms, there's been a concern that if all of the big banks in Europe were all on Amazon Web Services, for instance, then Amazon Web Services could potentially be the owner or at least touch data that would allow it to have a large impact on society. How has your regulator in Australia gone about this, and how does Backbase's product work when it comes to touching the data and using the cloud platforms?
So if I start with the second part of your question first, from a Backbase point of view, it's the standard engineering approach to this, encrypting data, just standard cloud security practices, and so
in Europe, the regulators are insisting that the banks own the encryption methods when it comes to the types of platforms. Is it the same?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, we enable that. Until recently, multi-cloud hasn't been a thing, but it seems like, and it's not my area of expertise, but I haven't seen the regulator mandating, multi-cloud per se, but we're starting to see more of that happening. There was an announcement, just this week of one of the big four banks here, pushing a whole bunch of applications into a different public cloud than they have been until recently. And part of the motivation there was, from what I read, was about having this ability just to, have portability of all of their critical applications in the cloud between either of those clouds, to increase resilience.
Fantastic. Okay. I mean, obviously this cloud topic is on the up at the moment. We don't believe it's going to be we've seen in the last week, Deutsche Bank adopting Google, and the HSBC, I think the last 2 days, press released about Amazon Web Services while they're already using Google. So I think that when it comes to artificial intelligence and also probably working with your platform, this topic will eventually come up more and more in Australia. So it'll be very interesting to hear how things evolve going forward. One of the things that we're seeing as well is that data centers are being opened by the big cloud providers. We've seen a couple of data centers being mooted across Central Eastern Europe here in Europe. And obviously Australia as well would probably seem to be a good place for a data center of one of the Googles or Microsofts to make a hub.
But I think there's, just at a more fundamental level, there's still a gap between what customers nowadays are looking for and what a lot of the banking experiences provide. It's actually still fairly rare to have, outside of the neos, to have a fully digital, smooth onboarding experience. That means you can go from, the public web page or an app, and in 2 minutes, have your card in your Apple Pay or Google Pay and be transacting with that. And that's what customers want, right? They've seen that it's possible, have similar experiences with their other digital apps. So there's quite a large gap for certainly the established banks with that. And then, another big gap is for the more complex products, so loan origination or other types of products. In a lot of cases, you might be signed in on web, or you might be, authenticated on your bank app. And if you want to take up a new product, you're kind of back to the start on the public side of it, and in some cases you're having to type in information about the products you already hold with the bank, right? So really frustrating experience. And from the conversations we have, banks are very aware of that. They're all looking at how they close that gap. And so that's one of the key areas where having an open platform like Backbase in place, with an omni-channel platform that can have one point of connection into the systems that master that data, and then orchestrate those journeys regardless of which channel it's across. We help solve that problem. And I think we'll see a lot more of banks wanting to, but also being forced to close that gap because of these emerging neos, who are showing what can be done when you've got the right digital tools.
So Australians want to use their money more efficiently and want a bank and a partner that helps them look after their money and invest it and get a bit of interest. And that hasn't happened yet. Not to the extent that customers would like, no. Okay. So when that does happen in Australia, perhaps we should all be worried. With the innovation over there and companies like Backbase going into Australia, you're helping the innovators already. Super. Well, Malcolm, listen, it's been fantastic talking to you. It's been very interesting as well to understand what Backbase is doing in the Australian market and how it's taking its know-how from its global platform into a market that really, by the sounds of it, needs it at the moment. And I hope you do really well. We were watching your career and watching how much Backbase will be achieving in Australia over the next few months, in Melbourne as well, and in New Zealand and in Sydney.
Yeah, well, it's been great being with you. Thanks for having me on, especially at this early hour of the morning for you.
Indeed. Well, I won't be going for a cocktail like you will be in a moment, but I might have another coffee. Thank you again, Malcolm. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks very much.